I was in a discussion today about the use of the active voice versus the passive voice, and I realized that there's not a very clear understanding of just what the passive voice is and its uses in language. I have to really quickly define what the active voice is and what the passive voice is. So the active voice is what you've probably been encouraged to use for most of your life. This is where you have the doer, you have the verb, and you have the receiver in very, very broad terms. For example, Jane broke the window. So Jane is the doer, broke is the verb, and then you have the window as the receiver of the action. The passive voice occurs when you change the order of the arguments in the sentence. So instead of saying Jane broke the window, you say the window was broken by Jane. In this instance, the receiver is placed in the subject position. You still have your verb, but it's been placed it's in the passive voice, and you have your by phrase with the doer. Thus, the window was broken by Jane. I have to clarify something about the passive construction. It's formed using the copula be and the past participle of the verb. If you're not sure what the past participle of the verb is, you can quickly find out by saying it was broken, it was thought, it was damaged, it was bought. I'm not really spending that long talking about the construction of the passive voice because I want to talk about other things. If you are not really sure how the passive voice is constructed, I suggest going over to Language Log. The guys there have done a phenomenal job creating one of the best explanations of the passive voice that I've seen, and I have a massive intellectual crush on them. One of the key features of the passive voice is that the by phrase at the end can be omitted, so that by Jane does not need to be there. You can say quite simply, the window was broken, and that is a perfectly grammatical construction. Because the by phrase can be omitted, this has led to a lot of confusion and belief that the passive construction takes away accountability, that you're taking away emphasis by the doer. That is true in some respects. You can omit who has done the action. You can say the window was broken to protect Jane. You can say the window was broken to say that you don't know who broke the window. You can say the window was broken to say that it's not important who broke the window. There's a lot of negative stigma attached to using the passive construction, and I think this has a lot to do with that little grammatical advice book known as the Elements of Style, which advises people not to use the passive voice and instead instructs them to use the active voice. But come on, Eden, it's in the Elements of Style. That's like the Bible of all grammatical handbooks, right? Seriously? You want to use the Elements of Style to talk about grammar? Do you also use a slide ruler to do calculus? Alright, you want to talk about the elements of style? There are 4 examples used in the book to demonstrate passive voice. 3 out of the 4 are not in the passive construction. Alright, let's start off. There were a number of dead leaves lying on the ground. The argument here is that lying is the past participle. It's not. It would be laying. If you said there were a great number of dead leaves laying on the ground, that would be the passive construction. And behind door number 2, at dawn, the crowing of a rooster could be heard. Actually, this is the passive voice. Good job, guys. The reason he left college was that his health became impaired. It was not long before she was very sorry that she had said what she had. I don't know, you can argue pretty convincingly for or against using the passive voice in any given construction. It really comes down to a matter of where you want the stress in the sentence to land. In English, the natural stress of a sentence falls either at the very beginning of the sentence or the very end. If you want to get really fancy, this is called cognitive salience. It really comes down to what you, as the writer or speaker or whatever, want to convey as the most important information in the sentence. If you want to emphasize that it was Jane who broke the window, putting it in the active voice is best, because it places the emphasis, the stress, on Jane. Saying the window was broken or the window was broken by Jane places the stress on the window, not on the action done by Jane. I think this is where people get upset about ambiguity, because this is where big law firms and scary lawyers come in and they use the passive voice for everything in order to obscure the meaning of what they're trying to say. The passive voice all by itself is not anything bad. The important thing here is understanding how the active voice and the passive voice both construe the same information in different ways. It can be favorable to use the active voice, but it can also be equally favorable to use the passive voice, either in the same situation or in completely different ones.
In the same old sickly